Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
Today I sit down with Phillip Jones, who's making an impression 1 year into his first term as mayor of Newport News, Virginia. A Marine Corps vet, an alum of both Harvard Kennedy School and Business School, Mayor Jones is the youngest person ever to be directly elected mayor of his hometown, and at 34, is the youngest mayor in the whole state of Virginia. Mayor Jones recently delivered his first State of the City address, where he announced that 2024 will be the year of the youth, with a focus on initiatives like night nets, a summer youth employment program, and a major investment to expand childcare in his city. We also talk about his journey to becoming an education mayor, his work on climate justice, as well as what most surprised him about the job so far. He has some great tips for engaging young people in government, as well as insights about what will motivate Virginia voters come November. And his passion for public service, inspired by his parents who are both veterans, I know will leave you inspired just like it did me. I hope you enjoy. Mayor Phillip Jones, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Debbie, thank you so much for having me. I've heard a lot about this podcast. I'm excited to get to it. I had a lot of friends on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Well, done. Drop. It's great having you. No, I'm just kidding. So good to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. I thought maybe I'd start with a couple questions. You are relatively new to being a mayor. You have been in the office now for just over a year. You just did your first State of the City, which I want to talk about. But tell me, just like, how's it been your first year? What's been your favorite thing about being mayor so far?
I would say to be mayor of the city that you grew up in is very humbling. I would say my mom and my dad are probably my two hardest constituents. My mom texted me about, the recyclables weren't picked up, and I was like, please come to city council and share your concern. And I just think there's a lot of expectations, a lot of energy in Newport News. I would say the best part of the job is interacting with our first responders, with the ones who are really on the front lines, with our firefighters, our police, our sheriff. In my mind, that makes all of this worth it.
Yeah. Did anything surprise you about being mayor that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I think I didn't expect that a lot of my time was going to be stakeholder engagement, where I don't have formal authority. So when you're negotiating with your state delegates or your state senators, or you're trying to corral and with votes with adjacent localities, less formal authority and more of let's work together. Let's see how we can engage different parts of our community. So I knew there was sort of negotiation and deals, and now I see it every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an important point too. It's like you don't have authority to do everything. You got to bring a lot of people along with you, right? You've got to set that vision and bring people along. So I think that's super smart. So you did, as I mentioned, just have your first State of the City. I love State of the City addresses. I'm such a geek because it's just a time where you get to take stock on what you've done over the last year and report out to your constituents, and then set that vision for the next year. So how did that go for you? What did you focus on? What did you tell people about how it's going and what you want to do?
First, I just want to give a shout out to City Council that supported me, as well as our entire executive team from all of the department heads. It was not just the mayor giving his State of the City, but it was a team effort. And if you go back, and our State of the City is on YouTube and on all our social media channels, you'll see that when I gave the speech, I had everyone behind me on the stage with me. This is not a one-person show, and I really wanted to highlight our executive leadership team, as well as the school superintendent, the head of the school board. It really was what we call Team Newport News. During my State of the City, I announced that this was going to be the year of the youth. We had, unfortunately, had a lot of youth-involved incidents with our police force over the last 14 months. And, I'm the youngest mayor in Virginia. And so, if anyone can reach the youth, I look very young. So the idea was maybe I can reach them. And so I've actually just gave a press conference about 3 hours ago. And what I talked about was, if you combine our capital improvement projects and our operating budget, we've invested $500 million over the year directly toward our youth. Additionally, with this administration, I really wanted to highlight 2 new programs. So the first was, I think in the day they called it midnight basketball. We call it night nets. But I really wanted to create a safe space for our youth on Friday nights during the summer. During the school year, they have sports, they have a lot of things, but there's a lot of idle hands during the summer. So we created our 2 largest community centers in the north or uptown and in downtown of the city. We have free pizza, there's Gatorade, there's pool, video games. You can come out from the hours of 7 p.m. to basically midnight, and you will have a safe space just to relax. And that was the first part. And the second part was we brought back the summer youth employment program. I'm a firm believer that if you can give someone or they can earn a dignified wage out of a responsible job, that's going to be a way that you can cut down on some of the crime that's happening in your city. So with Night Nets and the youth employment program, brought that back and really excited to see that. It started about 2 weeks ago. We're really excited about the future of the summer, but also for the city.
Yeah, that is so cool. I love that so much. And I think that you've done other things too when you think about youth. I know that you've invested in partnership with the Biden-Harris administration, right, in early childhood education. Tell us a little bit about that. I think it's, as we sit here in election year, frankly, it's important to understand kind of that interesting and special relationship between local government and federal government, right? That this investment that's being made, that's making a real impact on the ground. So tell us a little bit about that project.
Of course. So for those who don't know, Newport News was classified as an independent city. So I am the city and the county. There is no county that's above me. In Virginia, we still have independent cities. And so because of that, we were able to get double ARPA funds, which was a win for the city. So under the last mayor and administration, they received about $66 million in American Rescue Plan, the ARPA funds, right? Under that administration and continuing on into mine, we put aside 20 to 25% of those funds for an early childhood education center. I think if you look at the pipeline, right, if I get to you at 7th grade or 8th grade, that's far too late. It really starts at the very beginning. And so when you think about childcare, that's rising dramatically across the country. We have all these workforce development opportunities, but if you can't take care of your child, you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If the foundation is not solid, then it doesn't matter what other wraparound services we have at the state or at the local level. So we've contributed about 25% of ARPA funds toward the Peak Early Childhood Education Center. We actually hosted Senator Warner and the congressman came and talked about the Peak, Center, as well as some workforce development that we're doing on the peninsula. So I'm really excited about that. I have about $13 million of ARPA funds left, and I'm excited to put that to use as well.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. I know that education, when you even were running for office, that was a big part of your platform, and that education is super important to you. As you said, you are the youngest mayor ever elected in Newport News. So I think that you're uniquely qualified and in an interesting position to talk about education. I think that's wonderful. Why? And I think I read too that you are even going to or had been substitute teaching in the district too. I love that. So tell me just kind of why education has been top of mind for you from the beginning.
I've always said that education is the panacea, right? Education is a thing that can really change someone's life. And I'm a firm believer in the quote from Frederick Douglass. It talks about it's always going to be easier to build up children than to repair broken men and women. And so if you can invest in the education system, I think that takes care of a lot of things that happen in someone's later life. And if I'm going to be the education mayor, I actually had a lot of mayors and people reach out and say, listen, if you're going to be the education mayor, that's actually very dangerous because, in our form of government, school board is independently elected. So in Virginia, the mayor does not control the school system. I fund about 30% of their operating budget. And so it's less formal authority and more soft power and coordination. And I think years past, city council and school board have often had a tough relationship. And I've always said my strongest partner has to be the chair of the school board because all that matters is our kids. We have over 20,000 kids that are educated in Newport's public school system, and they're the future of the city. They are the future teachers and principals and executive and mayors, and we have to invest in them. And so, I visited every school. I try to talk to every single class. Every Friday, I read to the kids. I try to have, that youthful energy and bring it back to our kids.
That's so awesome. How's it going? Are you able to forge that relationship? I know you attend a lot of school board meetings. You take it, you really is top of mind for you. How do you feel like there's been measurable results that you've seen over the last year because of that partnership?
100%. I think if you look back, there's never been a mayor that shows up to school board. There's never been a school board that shows up to city council. And I think you have to develop relationships. And that's what we've done. We've invested in those personal relationships because I think there's a book, ego is the enemy. Let's put all ego aside and let's really focus on what's important. What's important is ensuring that our kids are able to go to public school, they're able to graduate, and they're able to become career-ready citizens, whether that's going to college, the trades, meaningful employment, but they are ready to give back in some capacity.
Yeah. One of the reasons I love this podcast and talking to people like you is I feel like that's such an anathema to what people think about when they think about, elected officials or government or, that somehow, but really that's what it's about, right? It's about building relationships and delivering results. And I think that's such an important message to get out there that you're making progress. And I'm really excited for you. So thanks for sharing that. I wanted to turn to another issue that I know that you have spent a lot of time on. It's super important to you, which is climate. You are a co-chair of our climate working group. So thank you very much for NewDEAL Forum. And also recently, I think we're named Bloomberg Sustainable City, probably American Sustainable City, which comes with some funding. Congratulations. What has climate change, how is climate change already impacting your city? And what are you prioritizing in terms of thinking about preparing for the future in terms of climate change?
Yeah. So the reason it's actually interesting. The reason why we've doubled down on climate here in Newport News is for a lot of our residents, we don't flood that much. People are like, why would you care about the climate? And what I tell everyone is, if you look at Newport News, I have, it's a predominantly red line city from years ago. We have one of the biggest coal terminals is right next to an African-American community. And so I think for a long time, when I see climate, I see environmental justice, right? I think that is the most important part when I think about climate for Newport News. I think about, I'm on the 10th floor of City Hall. I'm looking out of my window right now, and all I see is water, I see coal, and I see ships. And so I am trying to ensure that Newport News is well positioned for any climate future. We rely heavily on our federal partners, on our shipyard, on the coal terminal, but let's have a way that we can incorporate environmental justice in all that we do. And so we don't have a lot of flooding compared to some of our South Side cities, but I do know I always want to have an eye toward the future, especially as we look at environmental justice.
Yeah, I want to come visit Newport News. Actually, tell us a little bit about it is your hometown, as you said, right? Tell us what's special about Newport News.
So I love this city. So a little bit of background. So, I was in the military, I was in the Marine Corps before I became mayor in grad school, and my parents were in the Air Force. So that's what brought us to Newport News. My mother and my father were both Air Force pilots at Langley Air Force Base, and we lived in Newport News and on the peninsula. So they got out of the military, they retired here, and I went to, middle and high school here. Newport News is a sort of forgotten gem. In the Hampton Roads region, it's about 1.7 million people. It's a very large MSA, but because that there's 7 cities and a few counties, people forget how much, how large this MSA is. And so, Newport News is the 5th largest city in Virginia. We're just under 190,000 individuals, heavy military presence. And we, the reason why we became a city is because we have the largest employer in Virginia, which is the Huntington Ingalls or the Newport News shipyard. So we build every single aircraft carrier is built here, as well as dry dock. I'm looking at 3 or 4 carriers as we speak. And we build about, 30% of submarines for the United States Navy. And so we are big for the economy. We have a few international companies headquartered here. Canon USA headquarters is here. Ferguson's headquarters is here, as well as Liebherr, which is a Swiss-German company. So international city, heavy military, heavy on defense. And we sit right in between Richmond and Virginia Beach. And so I always say we're the crossroads of Virginia, and we have a lot to offer the Commonwealth and the country.
Yeah. That's remarkable, actually, that a huge impact, I'm sure, on the local and state and probably federal economy. So amazing. You mentioned your service in the military, and I wanted to ask that. So, you think about, you're such a young mayor, but this is not your first rodeo when it comes to public service. You accepted a commission into the U.S. Navy right after 9/11. What is it that you think that, why has service clearly been such a theme of your life? What is so important to you about service?
So I think it all goes back to my mom and my dad. My dad used to sit me down on his lap, and he always said, what man is a man that doesn't make the world a better place? And that was sort of how I was raised. They became missionaries after they did their 20 years in the Air Force. And so that was always top of mind. So 9/11 for me, I can remember, sitting here on the peninsula. I can remember, as a 6th grader, what that felt. And I knew that I wanted to go to the Naval Academy and ultimately join the Marine Corps. So when people ask me, why politics, in my mind, it's just a natural extension of being a servant leader. It's just a different form of service. So I always encourage veterans. We need you. I think the studies show that we're at the lowest amount of veterans in Congress, in local offices. And I think you see a lot of dysfunction. Usually veterans have the ability to work across the aisle. I think we need more of that in our country now. And so, being a Marine has been the best job I've had. Mayor is a close number 2.
Yeah. You after service, you went to Harvard, got a joint MPP and MBA from Kennedy School and from Harvard Business School. Did you do that with an eye toward knowing you would want to run for office at some point, or how did that kind of evolve for you?
No, it's a really good question. I've always felt that I wanted to be well positioned to serve at the intersection of the public and the private sector. And so in my mind, let's do the MBA, let's get the business, and let's also do public policy, because public policy has the potential to change people's lives, especially in underserved populations. And so the plan was, let's get both degrees and sort of see what's going to happen. Most people don't know this, but I actually wanted to start a Black bank. A CDFI was the plan. I think that for a lot of African-American communities, we're underbanked, and we have amazing ideas, but if you don't have the capital to get your ideas done, it's just going to sit there in your notebook. And so that was actually the plan. But the mayor, who was 74 at the time, announced that he was going to retire. And there's no term limits in Virginia as far as mayor. And quite honestly, I didn't want to wait 12 years after the next person. And so I said, you know what, I'm 32 at the time. Why not take a shot? I think I have a lot to offer, and we're able to hit the ground running. And it's been an honor every day.
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about public-private partnerships? It's a term that gets used a lot. I'm not sure our listeners really sometimes know what that means. You actually worked both for a little bit, I think, in the private sector, working on public-private partnerships before you came to the mayor, which we're obviously employing probably many, many public-private partnerships to get stuff done that you want to do. Like, give us an example of what you're working on, or why is that so important to kind of making government work well?
Yeah. So to put on my business hat, when I look at P3 or really P4s, it's how can I transfer that financial risk onto a private entity, right? My operating budget's about $1.1 billion, but that doesn't mean that I have a lot of cash flow just sitting, on on the sidelines. Everything's invested. We're building roads, we're building schools, et cetera. So when you look at a public-private partnership, is trying to bring all stakeholders together in order to get something done. So a really good example in Maryland, and because I'm a Naval Academy grad, I know the Annapolis parking garage is a good example of the city could not do it alone, but you add some private investor dollars, you add a little bit of federal and state partnership, and you're able to get the deal done. So a current P3 that we're working on right now, it's all open source, and hopefully we get to announce something here pretty soon, is, we are in Newport News. We build the world's greatest aircraft carriers, and we all know what's happening when you look at China and you look at the Pacific. We need to build more carriers, and we need to build more submarines. You really only build those in one or two spots. And so we're trying to work a public-private partnership in order to home port 3,000 to 4,000 sailors here in Newport News. Let's get them off of the ship in dry dock. Let's give them a higher quality of life. But that's going to require more than just the $40 million that I've already invested. That's going to require state. That's going to require purple or joint money from the federal government, as well as private developers to come in to make privatized housing, to make infrastructure that's more than the city can do. And so I personally think P3s are the future. It's how can we shift that risk onto private developers? Yes, there's a rate of return, but I think the more stakeholders you can bring to the table is going to increase your probability of success.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to understand that kind of we're all in this together, right? And then having that shared risk, having that shared thing that does result in a return, but also gives people an opportunity to really invest in their communities or, in other communities. So I think that's super important. There's one other thing I wanted to ask you about before I asked you about Virginia, which was something that happened right before you took office. And it kind of feels to me like maybe there's a conversation about, as you're thinking about how you govern resiliency or kind of, expecting the unexpected. So 4 days before you took office, there was a shooting that made national news, right? His six-year-old shoot a teacher. That's probably not what you thought was going to be first landing on your plate when you stepped into the mayor's office. So how did you respond to that? How has that shaped your year in office? And, kind of what can people learn about that? Really not knowing what's coming next and having to kind of step up and lead, right?
No, that's every time I do a podcast or a interview, people always, it makes sense. It made national news, and it was 2 or 3 days before I took the oath of office. And so, quite bluntly, I did not intend to become the education mayor. When I was at the Kennedy School and filling my notebook full of ideas, education, I was not a teacher. It's not my background, but I think because of Rich Neck and the shooting that happened, the entire city had to pivot to making education the top priority and to make sure that our kids were safe. Any resilience that I've gathered comes from the Marine Corps. We were always taught repetition. And so the Marine Corps has just placed me in tough situations and I've been able to get out of it. And so really able to tap into that well of fortitude is what we call it. To dig deep and to make sure that for my city that day and the following months that I was resilient, that I was like Shackleton, as he explored, to make sure that we had the ability to become resolute. And it wasn't not just me, we had entire team effort, but what my city needed that day and that week was to be the comforter in chief. And I just relied on my time in the military, quite honestly. Yeah.
No, I think it's it's good that you had that well of reserve and resilience. I want to ask you while I have you, as I mentioned earlier, we're an election year. Virginia is a swing state. So while we have you, what are you hearing? What are people worried about? How are people feeling about the election? What do you think it's going to take for somebody to be successful in your state in terms of getting votes?
So what I hear a lot about is kitchen table issues. It's everyone says the economy is doing well, but yet when I look at all my expenses and gas and food, people don't feel like things are going well. And so what I would encourage is, we're going to have multiple roundtables. There's been a lot of investments from this current administration into Newport News. And like I tell my staff every single day, you do all the hard work. Let's pack into a narrative and let's create this story. But we have to own our own destiny and tell our story, because if we don't tell it, who's going to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier on kind of where those investments have gone and how it's impacted real people's lives. You're the Peak Center, that, all the things that you're doing to make life better for your residents, comes from partnership, right, with the federal government, and comes from investment, and it comes from governing effectively. So thank you for that. I think I want to end on a question. You are the youngest mayor, as we've already said a couple times. So tell me, what do you, we have a lot of young people who listen to this podcast, people who might want to go into public service themselves one day. What's your advice for other young people who are thinking about a career, whether it's in elected office or just generally in government or other service areas?
I would say 100% do it. We need you in the arena. One of my favorite poems or speeches is Teddy Roosevelt's Man in the Arena. And at the end, he talks about, it's not the critic who counts. And that's what I would say. There's going to be individuals that say, you can't do it, you're too young. Not only am I the youngest mayor in Newport News, I'm the youngest mayor in Virginia. And so I think with that comes responsibility. And I always try to educate the youth. But if you see what's happening in your city, in your state, in your country, and you're talking about it, well, I would say be a part of the solution. Get involved, and I'll see you in the arena.
Yeah, well, maybe for people who are not young, how should they be talking to young people to get them to care, to get them to turn out, to get them, this is an incredibly consequential election, for example, and there's always that concern, are young people going to turn out and vote? What's the most effective way to make sure that they do?
I would say it's in the Marine Corps, we always said, nothing can be accomplished unless there's boots on the ground. You need to meet people where they are, right? The social media and all of that is fine, but you need to go to where people are. If it's the high schools, meet them at the high schools. If it's the 4-year colleges, your community colleges, meet the people. If it's the rec centers, you need to meet them where they're at and explain, why this is important. And I would say not only for this election, but I think too often, people will pop up before an election and say, hey, I need you to vote. You have to develop these bonds over time, over months. So I would say not just starting now, but continue to check in with young people, because it's very quickly people can change different voting demographics and who turns out. And so I tell everyone, please vote. It is part of I think it was Jefferson said, the duties and responsibilities of a well-informed electorate are always going to be a prereq to democracy. And we need more of that in today's
yeah. Absolutely. I can't leave without just saying how much I've loved your quotes today. History is right. I mean, it's so refreshing, right? We're having this conversation about kind of, history informing the future. And I love that you are so grounded in kind of the people's wisdom from the past, right? And we should put together the mayor's quotes from this episode, and there's some really good ones in there. Thank you for that. But I can't thank you enough for coming on our show today, and it's great to see you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. I just think that you've been a remarkable mayor in your first year here, and we're excited to see what you do in the coming years.
Thank you, Debbie. I really appreciate it, and also just thank you for NewDEAL. The ability to interact with leaders all over the country is something that I think is lacking in today's age. And so I've really enjoyed being a part of this cohort and this group, and look forward to future interactions.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
An Honorable Profession is a NewDEAL Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at NewDEAL for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.